My child, you are my work of art. My hands have molded you from birth. But my heart aches. I see my children who are hurting. They're cast aside like worthless clay. I long to restore, heal, and make beautiful. Will you join me? My hands will guide yours. There is much to do and much joy to find. And don't be surprised when my children mold you. I work in their lives through you, and in your life through them. Come, be like me to my little ones. Love them as I love them. Love them as I have loved you.
All right, so as Brian said, this is Orphan Sunday, and if you've been coming to Cornerstone for any length of time, you know that we put a strong emphasis on foster care and adoption, and because of that, we have at least 12 families here at Cornerstone that participate in that. There's probably a lot more. If anybody else here who does foster care or adoption, raise your hand. Several, come on, get them up high there. Yes, all right, thank you for that. So each service today, we're highlighting one family and putting the spotlight on adoption and foster care. So introduce yourselves, and let's start there.
My name is Leanne. My husband's Craig Cutforth, and we have 3 kids of our own. Davis is in the back. He's high school. Elise is middle school. Grayson is elementary, and then we've got our 2 foster girls, Riley and Paisley.
All right. And so, yeah, that's a handful, literally. So I had asked you to share one challenge and maybe one blessing that comes from taking on such a huge challenge like this. Mm-hmm. So, and I left it up to you on who gets to answer any of those questions. Yeah.
So for us, we've had many challenges along the way. They kind of came into our lives unexpectedly. We brought them home as newborns. We had about 36 hours notice that they were coming before they did. We were also in the middle of moving, and we've got 3 of our own kids, and it's kind of a whirlwind taking in new needs, unknown needs into your home, into the mix of it. And I think the biggest challenge for us has simply been juggling the needs of everybody different, because we've got high school and middle school and elementary and then these 2, and we have felt the most strain meeting the needs of our own kids. You know, when you take in foster care at different ages, kids come in with so many different needs, and their experiences that they're coming to you with are so different. These guys came to us as newborns. They had their own issues. But for the most part, it was all of a sudden we kind of went missing for our own kids and trying to find the balance of being there for them. That's been the hardest, and it continues to be the hardest part for us.
I can imagine that. And a blessing, something that maybe has been a surprise that way, or no? Just
the blessings for us obviously have been these two little girls. I mean, they are just incredible, getting to see them grow and bond with all of us. They did leave us at one point. I got to go back home, but when they came back to us, they were visibly different to us. And really the best way we could explain would just be they were little zombies. Just no emotion, no interaction, just kind of staring at life. And so to have them back with us and engaging with us and interacting and smiling and giggling and joking and being normal, healthy little girls, that's been a huge blessing just to see that change in them. But then also in our kids' lives, just to see them engage with these girls and truly call them their sisters. And we know that will continue on throughout all of our lives.
I see we got a game going on here. Andrea does that to me at home all the time. So I noticed that, did you have anything else to add? I noticed that they look very similar, about the same age. So did you mention that they were twins?
They are twins.
Okay, so twice as much love comes here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
We have no experience with twins.
I know.
We do now.
So we understand without experience how challenging this is, and to take this on is remarkable, and it's so commendable of you guys to be able to take this. This is, as you're all going to learn this morning, the very heart of God is to do this. I can't think of anything you could do more that brings God pleasure than to take on these two gals. So thank you very much. Let's give them.
You're welcome.
Thanks. I think the biggest challenge of that presentation was for Craig, because Craig always has a lot to say about things. Right, Craig? I think so. So good job. Taking care of the fatherless is one of the many justice and mercy initiatives that we are highly involved here at Cornerstone. My message today is titled Faith Works, and I want to lay out a spiritual foundation for why justice and mercy is such a major focus here at Cornerstone. I want to do this by talking about the relationship between faith and works. Faith is what we believe internally. Works is the outward expression of what we believe. They are two sides of the same coin. You really need them both in order to have a faith that works properly. So let's begin by first looking at some of the different dimensions of faith. Hebrews 11:6 says this: without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so let's recognize that according to this passage, only faith pleases God. Maybe a better way to say this is only doing something that is prompted by a belief in God is what gives him pleasure. Remember, works is the outward expression of what we believe. And in Hebrews chapter 11, which is often titled the heroes of the faith, it's about the outward expressions of faith by many of these men and women that are listed in this chapter, men and women of the ancient Bible. God leans forward in his chair whenever we do anything prompted by faith. It gives him pleasure. And since faith is the only way that we can please God, I want to look at what I believe are three dimensions of faith when it comes to believing in God's existence, okay? The first dimension is what I call unmovable faith. Jesus once took a child and he held this child up, and it's a young child, so probably more like a toddler. And he said this, he said, unless we change to become like this child, we cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. If you think about it, a child has faith that is yet to be tainted by negative life experiences, by hurts or disappointments, by fear or anxiety, by questioning. and doubting things. And so a childlike faith still thinks the best of everything and everyone, still sees the glass as half full, still dreams about a brighter future. The problem is that we adults have a lot of negative life experience. A lot of hurts and disappointments, lots of fears and anxieties, lots of questions and doubts, lots of reasons to think the worst, to think that the glass is half full, to stop dreaming about a better future. Half empty, that's what I meant to say. Okay. Jesus knew this reality. He knew this reality about us, and yet he still holds up this child and says that unless we change and become like this child, we cannot enter the kingdom of God. How is it possible for us wounded adults to be restored back to our original defaults? Honestly, we can't. And we shouldn't even want to, because we learn and we grow more from the challenges that we face in life than anything else. And if they disappeared, all those challenges and all the benefits that come from challenges would be wasted. So what is Jesus saying here? He's drilling down on the core issue of faith, that despite all the negative experiences we might face in life, despite all the reasons we might have questions and doubts, at the end of the day, a person with unmovable faith still chooses to go to bed believing that God exists. Don't confuse this with naive, mindless, uninquiring kind of blind faith. That is absolutely not what Jesus is suggesting here. You won't find that kind of faith encouraged anywhere in the Bible. He's merely saying that a person with unmovable faith will never abandon their belief in God, no matter what takes place in their life, because the alternative to living without faith is just not an option for them. Someday, all their questions will be answered, all their doubts will be assuaged, but until then, they are okay with living in that tension. Apostle Paul says it this way in 2 Corinthians 5:7. He says, "We live by faith, not by sight." If we were to live by our sight, most of us would probably never choose to believe, because what we see and experience on a daily basis gives us lots of reasons to question and doubt God's existence. Today's headlines alone are a good enough reason for this. But when we live by faith, not by sight, at the end of the day, despite everything, a person with unmovable faith still chooses to believe, still chooses to see the best in everything and everyone, still chooses to see the glass as half full, still chooses to dream about a better future. That is childlike faith. The second dimension is what I call enlightened faith. This is the kind of faith that looks at the complexity of the universe, the way history has unfolded, the way their own life has unfolded, and they come to the conclusion that there has to be a divine being behind all of it, someone who created this complex universe that we live in, someone who guides history along to its desired purposeful path. However, as obvious as this might seem to someone who's already enlightened about all of that, no one really comes to this conclusion without some supernatural help. Jesus once said in John 6:44, "No one comes to me, no one comes to Jesus unless God draws them." So by the time I became a teenager, I had become a pretty hardcore evangelistic atheist, on a mission to tell anyone who believed in God that they were a fool. They were weak. They needed a crutch in life in order to support their insecure existence. And I was quite the hardcore, in-your-face evangelist, even though I don't recall ever converting anyone to my disbelieving camp. Then one day in 1982, I walked through the door of a church in Southern California, and that all changed in an instant. I heard the music, I heard the singing. Suddenly I began to get emotional and weepy. The pastor's message seemed like he had hacked into my life somehow. I had absolutely no intention of believing in God that day. I didn't want to believe that he existed. I certainly didn't think I needed to believe that God existed. But I had such a profound, unexpected spiritual experience that day that I spent the next several months trying to prove that it was all in my mind. By the way, A big shout out to the new TV series God Friended Me. Anybody tracking with that? 2 people in this whole room. It's amazing. Seriously, it is so inspirational. It's about an atheist who gets friended by God. Enough said about that. Anyways, it's been 36 years since then, so I hope it's pretty obvious that I eventually ended up believing in God. I hope that comes through. Enlightened faith is one where God penetrates our disbelief. He turns the light on, so to speak. And it's the anthem of countless men and women throughout the ages who testify to the world that they were once blind, but now they see. Then there's a third dimension of faith called relational faith. Our text in Hebrew 11 says God rewards those who earnestly seek him. And it's speaking about those who are passionate about knowing who God is and what he's passionate about through this personal, intimate relationship with him. For many, God seems transcendent, unapproachable, unknowable, but through faith in Yeshua, we're invited to have a personal, intimate relationship with the creator of the universe. My gosh. We're invited to know God and to learn about the things that he's passionate about. And what you'll discover when you do this, that a huge part of God's passion found throughout the entire scriptures is to care for the most vulnerable people in this world, which leads to the important relationship between faith and works. When all 3 of these dimensions of faith are synced up, unmovable faith, a faith that chooses to believe despite what it sees. Enlightened faith, a faith that comes from God opening our eyes. Relational faith, the faith that strives to know God and what he cares about. We should end up with a faith that works properly. James says it this way in James 2:14-7. What good is it? What good is it if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds, no works? Can such a faith save him? I mean, that's pretty provocative right there. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, be warm and well fed, I'll pray for you, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. And he's using really strong language here. And if you take what he's saying at face value, he's teaching us that if our faith isn't working properly, then we probably don't have the right kind of faith. And it's important to be clear, he's not saying that we are saved by our works, but simply that if we are saved, then our faith should be working. In fact, the idea of internal faith not expressing itself by works is also something you never see taught in the Bible. Never. So we get so hung up on this, we're saved by grace, not by works, that we forget that once you're saved, works are supposed to come out. Real faith works, and it works on behalf of God. And look at the only example James gives for this kind of work that he has in mind, helping someone from a vulnerable population, somebody who needs clothes and shelter and clothing. Rabbi Saul, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 2. This is the quintessential passage that teaches us that we're not saved by works, also teaches this very same thing that James is teaching here. Ephesians 2:8-10 starts out by saying, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves. You cannot do it. It's a gift of God. You cannot work. All right, so end of story. You cannot work to earn salvation. You cannot be good enough, because the bar is the perfect one. We all fall short. That's what that means, right? And so the only way to be saved is just faith. But look what it goes on to say. For we are God's workmanship, created in Messiah Yeshua, to do what? Good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. That's an amazing statement right there. that before the beginning of time, God chose you not only to find him, but to work for him. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into this topic, okay? Psalm 111:7 says, "The Lord is righteous. He loves justice." The Hebrew word for righteous in this passage is the word tzedek. Zedek, okay? It's a TZ sound. I always have trouble saying that. When I was taking modern Hebrew, I would always pronounce it. My Israeli Hebrew teacher would say, no. It's like, okay, tzedek. You want to try it? Let's try it. Tzedek. Tzedek. It's not natural for our tongues to say that TZ sign. And it literally translates as justice or fairness. God is righteous because God always does what is right. That's where that word literally means. God is righteous because he always does the right thing. God never uses two sets of scales, one for one person and one for another. He never shows favoritism. He never discriminates. Always applies justice equally to everyone. In Israel, weights that are calibrated correctly are called mozne tzedek. It literally translates righteous scales. I love that. In Israeli courtrooms, they often quote Deuteronomy 16:20 as the judge is urged to tzedek, tzedek, tirdech, right? It translates justice, justice you shall pursue. Meaning that which was wrong should be righted, that which was stolen should be returned, the innocent should not suffer. God is righteous, he is just, he is fair, and he wants the playing field leveled when it comes to justice and fairness and equality in the world. And this is why God is so passionate about helping all the vulnerable people of this world. As long as you have even one vulnerable person in this world, the field is not level. And this bothers God because he's fair, he's righteous, he's tzedek. Now, the Hebrew word for a righteous person is a cognate of that word. It's tzaddik, right? Tzaddik is best translated a person of justice. And a tzaddik is someone who works on behalf of God to lift up those in the world who have not been treated rightly or justly. A tzaddik does all he can to level the playing field. And in most of these stories, the outward expression of their faith, the Bible talks about many people who are tzaddiks, particularly in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. And most of these stories, the outward expression of their faith was found in how they cared for the most vulnerable people in the world. Let me just give you a few, right? Lot is one example. 2 Peter 2:7 describes Lot as a tzaddik, a righteous person. And when God comes to earth to destroy Sodom, the city where Lot and his family reside, his uncle Abe begins to negotiate with God on behalf of the city, which I find fascinating that God would even enter into this negotiation, right? So Abe says to God, what if you find 50 righteous people there? Will you spare Sodom then? And God says, yeah, I can go with that. What about 40? Sure. Why not 40? I'll go with 40. What about 20? I guess so. Turns out God's limit was 10, right? And that's what they end up settling for. But God doesn't find even 10 righteous people in Sodom, and so Sodom is reduced to dust. In Ezekiel chapter 16, 49 through 50, we learn more about why God leveled this town. It says this, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them, as you have seen." And so, yes, there was immorality taking place in Sodom, and that factored into God's decision. But don't miss that while people were feeding their insatiable, selfish appetites, they had no desire, no time, no inclination to care for the most vulnerable people in their midst. And as a righteous man, Lot stood out like a sore thumb in this regard. How about King Josiah as another example? In 2 Kings 23:25, it says, "Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all of his heart, with all of his soul, with all of his strength, in accordance with all the Torah of Moses," the law of Moses. King Josiah was a tzaddik. And if you read about his life in 2 Kings, what you'll see is how fierce he was in tearing down idols, high places, and strongholds for God. But listen how the prophet Jeremiah chooses to memorialize Josiah for his life. In Jeremiah 22:16, it says, "Josiah defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well." And don't miss this last sentence. "Is this not what it means to know me?" declares the Lord. Remember earlier, this is all about getting to know God and what he cares about. How about Job? Some of you just flinched when I mentioned the word Job. Please, let's not talk about Job. That's risky. Honestly, a lot of us don't know what to do with Job. Job is described in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, as an upright, blameless man. And for this reason, the fact that Job kept his nose clean, he did all kinds of good things, he was a great man. For this reason, God lets Satan mess with his life. I mean, not just mess with it, virtually destroy it by all our standards today. That's hard to put in a file folder somewhere. But listen to what Job says about himself, about the things that he did that put him in this unique class of being a tzaddik. I'm just going to read you chapter 29, but there's a lot more in chapter 31. This is what he says. "Whoever heard me spoke well of me. Those who saw me commended me." And here's why. "Because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. The one who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth." I could read so much more. Let me read one more passage before we close here. This is James chapter 1, verse 27. "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." This passage contrasts a challenge for us, right? On one sense, we are to be distinct, holy, right? Set apart, not polluted by the world. On the other hand, we're supposed to have an influence in the world, to care for the world. And the reason why James says here to keep oneself from being polluted from the world is that when we do so, when we allow ourselves to get entangled in the world, we don't have enough bandwidth to take care of the most vulnerable people in the world. We get distracted from what we really should be doing. Amy Helling and Christy Gilbert and myself went to a conference in New York City called Amplifier Giving. I've shared about that organization before. It's an organization that's built on Jewish values on the subject of philanthropy. And so I had such a positive experience a couple years ago that I dragged them back to be able to learn a little bit more. Not surprising, it shouldn't be surprising to you, our values trace back to our Jewish heritage. I hope you know that by now if you've been coming. A lot of the teachings in the scripture, like when Jesus says, "Do not that you're in the world, but not of the world," it comes from this kind of stuff. Well, in Judaism, there's two camps that you fall in that relate to this. They seem like they're conflicted. The first one's called tzedek, and the second one's called kedushah. Tzedek is about justice, and kedushah is about our holiness. Here's what Rabbi Sid Schwartz says about this. Now, he's going to talk about this from a Jewish perspective, but this should be our perspective as well. This is not uniquely Jewish. This is where we come from. Our values, as you'll see here, are exactly the same. Okay, the purpose of Judaism is to advance tzedek, justice, and kedushah, holiness. Tzedek is the mandate for Jews to be fully engaged in the world so as to ally with the most vulnerable and to bring healing to a world fractured by prejudice, oppression, poverty, and war. Kedushah is the mandate for Jews to continue to be distinct people so that they can perpetuate the practices, values, and legacy of a tradition that can give meaning to our lives. While tzedek and kedushah may seem to be in conflict, Judaism is at its best when both values are exemplified by the way Jews show up in the world. So let me ask you, how do you show up in the world? Is that a fair question to ask? Think about that for a second. I want to tell you just a few ways that you can assist families here at Cornerstone and families in Boulder that are participating in foster care or adoption, okay? Number one, you can contact the Boulder County Human Services on foster care and sign up, at least find out about it. Samantha, who runs that organization, is here. She'll be in the foyer. Samantha, are you in this room right now? Okay, she'll be in the foyer. After this service, you could talk to her. We, as you saw in the announcement, we put on a Kids' Day Out once or twice a year. This next one's December 1st. It takes a lot of prep to pull this off. I mean, Amy basically transforms this place into Disneyland. It is so cool if you've never been here when she designs it. You can go also to the info center there. Natalie Magukin is the person that's over our foster care and adoption here at Cornerstone. She'd love to talk to you. You can help out with respite and foster family helping positions with the Boulder County. Their biggest need, Samantha tells me, is for people just to drive, just to schlep kids to things. Doctor's appointments, schools, extracurricular stuff. You can imagine the challenge of a family like the Cutforths, what they have to do to juggle all of that. You can help with childcare, meals when kids come home, financial assistance, even help us brainstorm some new ideas, events similar to Parents' Night Out. I think I called it Kids' Day Out, huh? It's really Parents' Night Out. The parents come here, we take care of them, the kids are just out there doing something. It's unique. That's why it's so popular. All right, stand up. So let me ask that question again. How do you show up in the world? In all the things that you do during the week, particularly whether you're going to school or you're going out of your house to work or you're taking care of your family, in all of those things, how do you show up? How do you balance that tension of being distinct but being righteous, being holy and being righteous? Kedushah, tzedek. And as I said in this message, I believe the answer to that question is to surrender yourself to God's passions, to know God, to know what He's passionate about, and then to respond, to be His hands and feet in a world is not level. How can we do our best to level it out? Whatever that issue might be. Today we're putting a spotlight on orphans, the fatherless, but there's all kinds of people groups we could name. How do you show up in the world? So Lord, I pray that even as we close with this song, that you'd use this space, this sacred space, as a place for us to hear from you, Lord. And help us to surrender our own selfish needs that keep us from even caring or thinking about these issues. And show us, Lord, enlighten us to the reality that there are so many people groups out there that are vulnerable, that we could participate in a small way to make a big impact. So we surrender. I'm speaking for everybody in this room, Lord. We surrender. We want to know you more. That's our heart, and I pray that in Jesus' name.